I never thought my job as a snowplow driver would turn into a war with someone who had more anger than sense. But that's exactly what happened when I met Deborah Chambers. My name is Kevin Patterson, and I've been working for the town of Lakewood, Minnesota for 8 years now. During those years, I've plowed through blizzards, ice storms, and conditions that would make most people hide under their blankets. I take pride in my work, keeping the roads clear and safe for everyone in our small community just outside Minneapolis. The job isn't glamorous, but it matters. When people can get to work, when ambulances can reach emergencies, when kids can get to school safely, that's because of crews like mine doing our jobs right. Lakewood is one of those places where everyone knows everyone, or at least they think they do. Population of about 12,000, spread across a mix of older neighborhoods near the town center and newer developments on the outskirts. The place I'm talking about, Riverside Estates, is one of those newer subdivisions. Built about 15 years ago, filled with McMansions and people who moved out from the city looking for space and quiet. What they got was space, quiet, and an HOA that would make a prison warden look easygoing. I first encountered Deborah on a Tuesday morning in early November. The first real snow of the season had hit the night before, dumping about 7 inches across the county. Nothing we couldn't handle, just a typical early winter storm. I was on my usual route, which included the main roads through Riverside Estates and several of the interior streets. The subdivision had a specific layout, one main entrance off Highway 12, then a network of curving streets that all connected back to that main drag. Efficient for plowing, actually, because I could loop through without having to backtrack. I was making my second pass through the neighborhood around 6 in the morning, cleaning up what the overnight crew might have missed, when I saw her. She was standing in the middle of Willow Creek Drive, right where it intersected with Birch Lane, wearing a puffy purple coat and waving her arms like she was trying to land an airplane. I slowed the plow, figuring maybe there was an emergency or someone needed help. Rolling down my window, I called out, "Everything okay, madam?" She marched up to my truck, and I got my first good look at her. Mid-40s, blonde hair cut in that asymmetrical style that screamed suburban authority, and an expression that suggested I had personally offended her by existing. "Are you the one responsible for plowing this neighborhood?" she demanded. "Yes, madam, I'm Kevin Patterson, been plowing this route for 6 years now." "Well, Kevin, we have a serious problem. You're pushing snow onto my property and I will not tolerate it any longer." I blinked, confused. I'd been plowing this route the same way for years and never had a complaint. "Madam, I follow the standard procedures. The snow has to go somewhere, and we push it to the right side of the road where it won't block driveways or intersections. I don't care about your procedures. You're damaging my landscaping and creating an eyesore. I've spent thousands of dollars on my front yard, and I refuse to have it buried under dirty snow all winter." I took a breath, staying professional. "I understand your concern, but I have to follow town regulations. If you have an issue with the plowing procedures, you can take it up with the Public Works Department. Their number is—" "I don't need a number," she cut me off. "I'm Deborah Chambers, president of the Riverside Estates HOA, and I'm telling you right now that you need to find another way to plow this street. Push the snow to the other side, or down toward the retention pond, or I don't care where, just not on my property." The problem was that her property sat on a corner lot, one of the larger ones in the subdivision. Because of where it was positioned, some snow naturally ended up along her front yard when I plowed both streets. But moving the snow somewhere else wasn't just impractical, it was against regulations. We had specific guidelines about where snow could be placed to maintain drainage patterns, and keep emergency access clear. Mrs. Chambers, I really can't do that. The snow needs to go where it's designated for proper drainage and safety. If I start pushing it into different areas, it could block other properties or create hazards. Her face went red, a vein pulsing in her temple. Then I'll make sure you can't plow here at all. You have no idea who you're dealing with. She stomped off toward her house, pulling out her phone as she went. I sat there for a moment, wondering what I'd just gotten myself into, then continued my route. I had a whole town to clear, and I couldn't waste time arguing with someone who thought their landscaping was more important than public safety. That afternoon, my supervisor, Tom Henderson, called me into his office. Tom was a good guy, been with the town for 20 years, and had seen every kind of complaint imaginable. "So I got an interesting call today," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Deborah Chambers from Riverside Estates says you were rude to her and refused to properly plow her street." I explained what happened, the whole conversation, keeping to the facts. Tom listened, nodding occasionally. "Yeah, that sounds about right," he said when I finished. "We've had run-ins with that HOA before. They think because they pay property taxes, they can dictate exactly how we do our jobs." "You did everything right, Kevin. Keep plowing your route the same way you always have. If she calls again, I'll handle it." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, we got another snowfall, this one about 4 inches. I was out at 5 in the morning, clearing my route in the dark. When I got to Willow Creek Drive, I found something that made me slam on the brakes. Someone had placed orange traffic cones across the entire street, the kind used for construction zones, creating a barrier that completely blocked access. A handmade sign attached to the center cone read, "No snow plowing by order of Riverside Estates HOA." I sat there, engine idling, staring at this ridiculous roadblock. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was potentially dangerous. If an emergency vehicle needed to get through here and the snow wasn't cleared, someone could get hurt. I pulled out my phone and called Tom. "You're kidding me," he said when I explained the situation. "Wish I was. What do you want me to do? Can you move the cones and plow anyway?" "Technically. Yeah, but if she's going to make this a thing, I want documentation that I'm following orders." Smart thinking. "Move the cones to the side, do your job, and I'll make some calls. This is getting ridiculous." I got out of the truck, moved all 12 cones to the shoulder, and plowed the street like I always did. The whole time, I half expected Deborah to come running out of her house screaming, but her windows stayed dark. Maybe she was watching, maybe she wasn't, but I had a job to do. The next week brought a series of meetings and phone calls that I only heard about secondhand. Tom dealt with the HOA board, explaining town ordinances and snow removal regulations. The town manager got involved. Even the mayor's office fielded a call from Deborah, who apparently threatened to sue the town for property damage and harassment. Through it all, I kept plowing my route the same way, and Deborah kept finding new ways to make it difficult. She started parking her Mercedes right on the street edge where the snow would normally go, forcing me to plow around it and leave a mess. When I had the car towed per town regulations about snow emergency parking, she filed a complaint with the police department. The complaint went nowhere, but it meant I had to waste an afternoon giving a statement. She put up decorative boulders along her property line, right in the easement where technically the town had right-of-way for utilities and maintenance. Those boulders could damage my plow if I wasn't careful, so I had to slow down and navigate around them, adding time to my route. Tom submitted a formal request for her to remove them. She refused. By mid-December, I'd had enough. The constant harassment, the games, the roadblocks, It was all making my job harder and putting other people at risk. Every minute I spent dealing with Deborah's nonsense was a minute I wasn't spending keeping other roads clear. But I also knew I couldn't just ignore the situation. I needed to find a solution that was legal, ethical, and effective. That's when I discovered something interesting about the Riverside Estates subdivision plat. I was in the town offices, dropping off some paperwork, when I started chatting with Linda Morris from the planning department. She'd heard about my issues with Deborah, and she mentioned something that caught my attention. You know, Willow Creek Drive and several of those interior streets in Riverside aren't actually public roads, right? I stared at her. What do you mean? When the developer built Riverside Estates, they kept several of the interior streets as private roads maintained by the HOA. The town only has responsibility for the main entrance and a few of the primary routes. Let me show you. She pulled up the subdivision plat on her computer, a detailed map showing property lines, easements, and road classifications. Sure enough, Willow Creek Drive, where Deborah lived, was marked as a private HOA-maintained road. So were Birch Lane, Maple Court, and Cedar Circle. Why have we been plowing them then? I asked. Linda shrugged. Probably because we always have and nobody questioned it. The town likes to be helpful, and as long as we have the equipment and manpower, we usually maintain private roads in subdivisions if we're already in the area. But legally, we have no obligation to plow them. That's the HOA's responsibility. I felt something click into place in my mind. I wasn't thinking about revenge exactly, more about resource allocation and following the actual rules. If Deborah wanted to dictate how her street got plowed, she could take it up with her HOA. Or better yet, since she was the HOA president, she could figure it out herself. I brought this information to Tom, along with a proposal. What if we stop plowing the private roads in Riverside Estates? We focus on the public roads we're actually responsible for and let the HOA handle their own streets like the plat says they're supposed to. Tom rubbed his chin, thinking. We've been doing it for years, though. People are used to it. But we're not required to. And right now, Deborah is costing us time, money, and creating potential liability issues with all her stunts. If we pull back to just our legal obligations, we free up resources and eliminate the conflict. Let me run this up the chain. If the town manager and legal department sign off on it, we can make the change. It took 2 weeks of internal discussions, legal reviews, and planning meetings, but eventually, the town made it official. Starting January 1st, the Public Works Department would only maintain public roads within the Riverside Estates subdivision. Private HOA roads would be the responsibility of the homeowners association, as specified in the original development agreement. The town sent formal letters to every resident in Riverside Estates, explaining the change and providing 60 days' notice. The responses were immediate and loud. Most residents had no idea their streets were private. They'd been paying HOA dues for years, but the fees were relatively low, around $300 annually, because the HOA didn't actually maintain much. They handled some landscaping at the entrance, organized a summer block party, and sent out passive-aggressive letters about garbage placement. Actually maintaining roads, especially snow removal, was going to be expensive. Deborah called an emergency HOA meeting in mid-December. I heard about it from my neighbor, Rick Thompson, who lived in Riverside Estates on one of the public roads that I'd still be plowing. Rick came over one evening with a 6-pack and a story. You should have seen it, Kevin. Deborah was up there acting like the town had personally betrayed everyone. Said you had a vendetta against her and convinced the town to stop plowing out of spite. That's not what happened, I said, though I couldn't help feeling a little satisfied. Oh, I know. Most of us know. She's been a nightmare since she became HOA president 2 years ago. Fines people for having the wrong shade of shutters, sent violation letters to the Johnsons because their kid left a bike in the yard overnight. This is just her biggest mess yet. What's the HOA going to do about snow removal? Rick took a long drink of his beer. That's the thing. Getting a commercial snow removal contract this late in the season is almost impossible and expensive as hell. Deborah's trying to lowball local contractors, offering like half what the job's actually worth. Nobody wants to take it. The January 1st deadline came and went. The town officially changed the snow removal routes, and I no longer had any obligation to plow Willow Creek Drive, Birch Lane, Maple Court, or Cedar Circle. The main roads through Riverside Estates still got cleared, so anyone living on those streets was fine. But the approximately 38 homes on the private roads, including Deborah's Showcase Corner lot, were now on their own. The first test came on January 7th. A major winter storm rolled through Minnesota, the kind that makes national news. 18 inches of heavy, wet snow fell over a 24-hour period. Wind chills dropped to -30. The governor declared a state of emergency, and schools across the region closed. I worked double shifts for 3 days straight, keeping the main roads passable. My truck became my second home, the sound of the plow blades scraping asphalt a constant soundtrack. I cleared highways, residential streets, school zones, and hospital access routes. I plowed the main roads through Riverside Estates 3 times, making sure they were safe and clear. And I drove right past Willow Creek Drive without touching it. The snow piled up on that private road, undisturbed except for a few tire tracks where residents had tried to drive through it. I could see Deborah's house from the main road, her Mercedes buried in her driveway, the decorative boulders she'd placed now just lumps under the snow. My phone started ringing on the second day of the storm. Residents from the private roads, people who'd never called me before, suddenly had my number and wanted to know when I'd be plowing their streets. "I'm sorry, but those are private HOA roads," I explained for the 15th time. "You'll need to contact your HOA president about snow removal." "But you've always plowed them before." That was a courtesy service the town provided. "As of January 1st, we're only maintaining public roads. You should have received a letter about this in November." Some people were understanding, apologizing for bothering me and saying they'd take it up with Deborah. Others got angry, as if I was personally responsible for their situation. I stayed polite but firm. This wasn't my decision alone, it was official town policy, and I was just following the rules. Rick called me on the 3rd day. "Dude, it's chaos over here. People can't get out of their driveways. Deborah's phone is apparently ringing nonstop, and she's claiming the HOA doesn't have the budget for emergency snow removal. Some people are trying to shovel the whole street by hand. What about hiring a contractor?" She finally found one willing to take the job, but they can't get here for another 2 days, and they're charging triple the normal rate because it's an emergency. The HOA is going to have to do a special assessment to cover it. A special assessment meant every homeowner in Riverside Estates would have to pay extra money on top of their regular HOA dues to cover unexpected costs. For a snow removal contract that should have been arranged months ago, that assessment was going to be substantial. I almost felt bad for the residents who had nothing to do with this situation, but they'd elected Deborah as their HOA president. Maybe this would teach them to pay more attention to who they put in charge. The contractor finally showed up on day 5, after the storm had passed and the sun was trying to break through the clouds. I happened to be finishing up my regular route when I saw their truck. a big orange plow that had seen better days, struggling through the deep snow on Willow Creek Drive. It took them 6 hours to clear what would have taken me 2, and the job was sloppy, with uneven patches and snow piled haphazardly across lawns. That weekend, Deborah called another HOA meeting. Rick went and reported back. She tried to spin it like this was all a temporary setback, and everything was under control. Then she presented the special assessment, $450 per household, and people lost their minds. Half the room was shouting at her, asking why she didn't plan for this, why she let the situation with the town deteriorate, why she didn't negotiate a better contract with the Plow service. What did she say? Blamed you mostly. Said you had poisoned the town against the HOA and that she was exploring legal action. But then Jerry Martinez stood up. He's a lawyer, lives on Birch Lane, and he shut her down. Explained that the town was completely within their rights, that the HOA had always been responsible for those roads according to the development agreement, and that she'd failed in her duties as president. It got ugly. The rest of January brought 3 more significant snowfalls. Each time, I plowed my designated routes, and each time, the private roads in Riverside Estates got ignored until the overpriced contractor could make it out. Response times varied from 1 day to 4 days, depending on how busy the contractor was with their regular clients. People who'd never thought twice about snow removal before were suddenly very aware of how important it was and how much it cost. By February, I started hearing rumors that residents were organizing to recall Deborah from the HOA board. Minnesota HOA law allows homeowners to call for a special election if they gather enough signatures, and apparently they had more than enough. People were angry about the special assessment, angry about the delayed snow removal, and angry about the years of petty tyranny that had led to this mess. Deborah didn't go quietly. She started a campaign claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy between me and disgruntled homeowners. She posted long rants on the neighborhood Facebook page about how she'd been trying to protect property values and maintain standards while everyone else was being ungrateful. She threatened to sue multiple people for defamation. She even showed up at a town council meeting to demand that I be fired for dereliction of duty. The town council listened politely. Then the mayor, a tough older woman named Patricia Walsh, explained very clearly that I had followed town policy exactly as required, and that the council fully supported the Public Works Department's decision to maintain only public roads. Deborah stormed out, promising that this wasn't over. The recall election happened in early March. It wasn't even close. Deborah was removed as HOA president by a vote of 83 to 12. The new president, a retired engineer named Marcus Williams who lived on Cedar Circle, immediately reached out to the town to rebuild the relationship and started negotiating a proper snow removal contract for the next season. But Deborah still wasn't done. In late March, after most of the snow had melted, she filed a lawsuit against me personally and against the town. The complaint alleged discrimination, harassment, property damage, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She claimed that my actions had caused her mental anguish, damaged her reputation, and devalued her property. She wanted $50,000 in damages. The town's legal department assigned an attorney to handle it, and I had to give multiple depositions, recounting every interaction I'd had with Deborah. It was stressful and time-consuming, taking me away from work and my family. My wife, Sarah, was incredibly supportive, but I could tell the situation was weighing on both of us. The attorney, a sharp woman named Elizabeth Grant, assured me that the lawsuit had no merit. She's angry and lashing out. Everything you did was within town policy, and you have documentation to prove it. This will get dismissed, but we have to go through the process. She was right. In June, a district court judge threw out the entire lawsuit, ruling that Deborah had no legal basis for any of her claims. The judge's written opinion was particularly scathing, noting that the plaintiff's grievances arise entirely from her own actions and misunderstandings of municipal responsibilities, and that attempting to hold a public employee personally liable for following official policy is frivolous and borders on harassment. The judge went further, ordering Deborah to pay the town's legal fees, which had mounted to nearly $18,000. He also issued a warning that any further frivolous litigation would result in sanctions. You'd think that would be the end of it, but Deborah had one more trick up her sleeve. In July, residents on the private road started noticing problems with the street surfaces. Cracks were appearing, potholes forming, sections of asphalt crumbling. Apparently, the cheap contractor Deborah had hired during the winter had used aggressive plowing techniques and possibly even salt that damaged the road base. Marcus Williams, the new HOA president, got an engineering assessment done. The private roads needed significant repairs, estimated at around $90,000. The HOA didn't have that kind of money, which meant another special assessment, this one even larger than the snow removal fee. Homeowners were furious, and several of them filed their own lawsuit against Deborah, claiming she'd breached her fiduciary duty as HOA president by failing to maintain the roads properly, and by hiring an unqualified contractor without proper vetting. That lawsuit was still ongoing when I heard that Deborah had put her house up for sale. Rick told me about it over beers in August. We were sitting on my deck, enjoying the summer evening, the snow and ice feeling like a distant memory. She's asking way too much for it, trying to recoup what she spent on the landscaping and upgrades. But everyone knows about the lawsuit and the HOA drama. Her realtor apparently told her point blank that the reputation damage has killed any chance of getting full value. Think she'll ever admit she was wrong? I asked. Rick laughed. People like Deborah never admit they're wrong. In her mind, she's the victim in all this and everyone else is unreasonable, but at least she won't be our problem anymore. The house sat on the market for months, the price dropping every few weeks. Eventually, she accepted an offer that was nearly $40,000 below asking price. The new owners seemed nice, a young couple with a baby, both of them working in downtown Minneapolis. They introduced themselves to the neighbors, showed up at HOA meetings, and didn't try to dictate how anyone should do their jobs. As for me, I kept plowing my routes, following the same procedures I always had. The town and the Riverside Estates HOA worked out a formal agreement where the town would provide snow removal services for the private roads at a contracted rate, with clear terms and expectations on both sides. Marcus Williams made sure every homeowner understood what they were paying for and why. That next winter, when the first snow fell, I plowed Willow Creek Drive again, but this time under a proper contract with clear terms. The decorative boulders were gone, removed as part of the road repair project. There were no cones blocking my path, no cars strategically parked to cause problems, no angry woman in a purple coat standing in the street demanding I change my route. It was just a job, like it had always been meant to be. I saw Deborah one more time before she moved. It was early October, and I was driving through Riverside Estates on my way to check on some drainage issues before winter. She was outside her house, supervising the movers loading her furniture into a truck. She looked older than I remembered, tired and defeated. For a brief moment, our eyes met. I considered waving, maybe offering some kind of acknowledgement, but her expression hardened and she turned away. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. The whole experience taught me a lot about dealing with difficult people and the importance of knowing the actual rules and regulations that govern your work. If I tried to fight Deborah on her terms, arguing and getting emotional, nothing would have changed except my blood pressure. But by stepping back, researching the actual legal requirements, and letting the system work as it was designed, the problem solved itself. It also taught me about the power dynamics in HOAs and why people need to pay attention to who they elect to leadership positions. Deborah had been given authority over her neighbors' lives, and she'd abused it, making decisions based on personal vendettas and ego rather than what was best for the community. The residents of Riverside Estates learned an expensive lesson about accountability and governance. Tom retired the following spring, and the town promoted me to lead supervisor for the winter maintenance crew. It was a good move, more responsibility, but also more control over how we operated. One of the first things I did was conduct a comprehensive review of all our snow removal routes, making sure we had clear documentation about which roads were public and which were private, and ensuring that any private roads we serviced had proper contracts in place. I also implemented a new training program for dealing with difficult residents. Not everyone who complains is a Deborah, but knowing how to de-escalate situations, document interactions, and follow proper procedures protects both the employees and the town. We brought in a consultant who specialized in public sector communication, and the feedback from the crew was overwhelmingly positive. The Riverside Estates HOA actually became one of our best clients under Marcus Williams' leadership. He was professional, responsive, and realistic about what snow removal could and couldn't accomplish. When there were issues, he approached them collaboratively, looking for solutions rather than someone to blame. It made my job so much easier and proved that HOAs don't have to be nightmares when they're run by reasonable people. Sarah and I occasionally drove past Deborah's old house, now occupied by the young couple with their growing family. They'd painted it a softer color, removed some of the more ostentatious landscaping features, and generally made it look more welcoming. The neighborhood seemed happier too, less tense, more like a real community rather than a collection of houses ruled by arbitrary regulations. I heard through the grapevine that Deborah had moved to a condo in Edna, one of those places with no individual yard maintenance and a management company that handles everything. Maybe that was better for her, less responsibility and fewer opportunities to clash with neighbors over every little thing. Or maybe she found new battles to fight. I didn't really care either way as long as she wasn't blocking my plow routes. The following winter was one of the heaviest on record. We had over 80 inches of total snowfall, weeks of sub-zero temperatures, and multiple blizzards that shut down highways and schools. My crew worked around the clock, and I was out there with them, coordinating routes, managing equipment breakdowns, and making sure every neighborhood got the service they needed. Riverside Estates, including all those private roads that had caused so much trouble, stayed clear and accessible throughout the entire season. The contrast with the previous year couldn't have been more stark. Where before there had been conflict, delays, and angry residents, now there was smooth operation and satisfied customers. The HOA even sent a letter to the town council commending our service and specifically mentioning my leadership. It felt good, not in a petty revenge kind of way, but in a professional satisfaction kind of way. This was what happened when people worked together, when egos didn't get in the way of common sense, when everyone understood their roles and responsibilities. It was how things were supposed to work. I ran into Jerry Martinez, the lawyer who'd stood up to Deborah at that meeting, at a local coffee shop one morning. He recognized me and came over to shake my hand. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "What you did, pulling back on the plowing, it was the wake-up call our neighborhood needed." We'd been sleepwalking through HOA elections, letting whoever wanted power take it without asking questions. Deborah wasn't the first bad president we'd had, just the worst. Now people actually pay attention and show up to meetings. We've got good leadership, clear budgets, and actual accountability. "I appreciate that," I said, "but honestly, I was just doing my job and following the rules. The change came from residents like you who stood up and demanded better." "Maybe, but you showed us that we couldn't just blame the town for our problems. We had to take responsibility for our own community. That's a valuable lesson." We talked for a while longer, and he filled me in on some of the ongoing improvements in Riverside Estates. They'd formed committees to handle different aspects of neighborhood management, brought in professionals for financial oversight, and even revised their CC and articles, which are the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern what homeowners can and can't do, to remove some of the more ridiculous and petty rules Deborah had championed. As I drove to work that day, I thought about how strange it was that a simple dispute over snow plowing had led to such significant changes. But maybe that's how these things work. Sometimes it takes a crisis, even a manufactured one, to reveal deeper problems and motivate people to fix them. The seasons continued their cycle. Spring brought flooding concerns and pothole repairs. Summer meant street maintenance and utility work. Fall was preparation for the next winter. And when the first snow fell in November, I was ready. My crew was ready, and our routes were clearly mapped and properly contracted. I never saw Deborah again. Sometimes, I wondered what she thought about the whole situation, whether she ever reflected on her actions, or recognized how differently things could have gone if she'd just been willing to compromise and communicate. But I also knew that some people never change, never see beyond their own perspective, never accept responsibility for their mistakes. What mattered was that I'd learned from the experience. I'd become a better supervisor, a better employee, and honestly, a better person. I'd learned when to stand firm and when to be flexible, how to navigate bureaucracy, and how to document everything, because you never know when you'll need proof of what actually happened versus what someone claims happened. The Riverside Estates situation became something of a case study in our department. When training new employees, especially those who'd be dealing with the public, we'd discuss what happened, how it was handled, and what lessons could be learned. The key takeaways were always the same. Know your actual responsibilities, follow proper procedures, document everything, and don't let emotion drive your decisions. My career continued to advance. I became involved in regional conferences about winter maintenance, sharing best practices with other municipalities and learning from their experiences. Apparently, difficult HOAs are a universal problem, not just something unique to Riverside Estates or even Minnesota. Everywhere, there are homeowner associations. There are Deborahs, people who mistake authority for power and community leadership for personal kingdom building. But there are also Marcus Williamses, Jerry Martinez's, and all the other residents who care about their communities enough to put in the work of good governance. Those are the people who make jobs like mine rewarding, who appreciate the services we provide, and who understand that we're all in this together, trying to make our towns and neighborhoods safe, functional, and pleasant places to live. Years later, I was invited to speak at a state HOA conference about maintaining positive relationships between municipalities and homeowner associations. I told the Riverside Estates story, leaving out names but not details, and the audience response was incredible. Board members came up afterward to share their own horror stories and to ask for advice about avoiding similar conflicts. My main message was simple. Communication, clear contracts, and mutual respect are essential. HOAs need to understand what services municipalities are legally required to provide versus what they offer as courtesies. Municipalities need to be clear about their capabilities, limitations, and expectations. And both sides need to remember that they're serving the same people, the residents who just want safe streets, functioning utilities, and peaceful neighborhoods. The woman who'd organized the conference pulled me aside afterward. That story about the blocked plow route really resonated with people. Would you be willing to write it up as an article for our quarterly newsletter? I agreed, and the article got picked up by several other publications focused on municipal management and HOA governance. I started getting calls from other towns facing similar issues, asking for advice about how to handle difficult associations or how to clarify responsibilities for private roads. It was strange, becoming something of an expert on this topic because of what had started as a frustrating personal conflict. But I guess that's how expertise develops sometimes, through experience, even difficult experience, and the willingness to learn from it and share those lessons with others. Sarah and I celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary that year. Over dinner, she reminded me of how stressed I'd been during the Deborah situation, how I'd come home frustrated and angry, questioning whether I wanted to stay in public service at all. "I'm glad you stuck it out," she said. "You're good at what you do, and you've helped a lot of people, both through your actual work and through teaching others how to handle these situations. That's worth something." She was right. It was worth something. Every winter when the snow fell and I knew my crew was out there keeping people safe, every time a resident thanked us for clearing their street quickly after a storm, every time an HOA board approached us with reasonable requests and professional attitudes, it reminded me why this work mattered. Deborah had tried to make my job impossible, had tried to force me to choose between doing my job correctly and appeasing her unreasonable demands. By refusing to compromise on the actual requirements and responsibilities, I'd protected not just myself, but the entire system of municipal services that people depend on. The final chapter of the Deborah saga came unexpectedly 3 years after she'd moved away. I got a call from Marcus Williams asking if I'd be willing to participate in a community appreciation event Riverside Estates was planning. They wanted to recognize various service providers who kept the neighborhood running, including public works, police, fire, and utilities. I almost declined, not wanting to make a big deal out of just doing my job, but Sarah convinced me to go. "Let them say thank you," she said. "It means something to them, and it wouldn't hurt you to accept some recognition for once." The event was held on a Saturday afternoon in July, a neighborhood barbecue with probably 200 people in attendance. Various service providers got certificates and handshakes, and there were speeches from the HOA board about the importance of community partnerships. When it came to my turn, Marcus said something that stuck with me. "A few years ago, our neighborhood learned a hard lesson about responsibility, respect, and leadership. We were fortunate that the person who taught us that lesson, Kevin Patterson, did so with professionalism and integrity. He didn't get angry, didn't retaliate with petty actions, just followed the rules and let us figure out what we needed to do. That's the kind of public servant every community needs." The applause was genuine and warm. People came up afterward to shake my hand, to share their own memories of that difficult winter, and to express appreciation for how I'd handled things. Several admitted they'd been angry at me initially, thinking I was punishing the whole neighborhood for one person's actions, but they'd come to understand that I was actually doing my job exactly as I should. One older gentleman, who I later learned had been one of the original developers of Riverside Estates, pulled me aside. "I always meant for those private roads to be maintained by the HOA," he said. "That's why we set it up that way in the plat." But somewhere along the way, people forgot, and the town was generous enough to take care of it anyway. When that woman started causing problems, you reminded everyone what the actual agreements were. That's not punishment, that's just reality. Thank you for not letting one difficult person abuse the system. Driving home that evening, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't even realized I needed. The Deborah situation had affected me more than I'd wanted to admit, had made me question myself and whether I was doing the right thing. But time and outcomes had proven that following proper procedures, respecting actual legal responsibilities, and refusing to be bullied into improper actions had been exactly the right approach. My crew noticed the change too. I was lighter at work, less worried about every potential complaint, more confident in making decisions. We implemented new policies based on what I'd learned, creating clear written agreements with all private entities we serviced, establishing firm boundaries about what we would and wouldn't do, and documenting everything meticulously. The following winter was my 10th season as a snowplow driver, though I was mostly supervisory by that point. On the first big snow of the season, I still went out with a truck, wanting to stay connected to the actual work. I plowed through Riverside Estates, down the main public roads and then through the private streets we now serviced under contract. Willow Creek Drive was clear and peaceful, the houses lit up with early morning lights as residents prepared for their days. The new family in Deborah's old house had kids waiting for the school bus, bundled up in winter coats and boots, waving as I drove past. It was a simple, ordinary scene, the kind that happens in neighborhoods across Minnesota every winter morning, and that was exactly how it should be. No drama, no conflicts, no one standing in the street trying to block my route. Just people living their lives, getting to work and school safely, because a bunch of plow drivers were out there doing their jobs right. I thought about Deborah occasionally, wondering where she was and if she'd found peace with herself. I hope she had, not for my sake, but for hers and for whoever had to deal with her now. Anger and ego are exhausting to carry around, and life is too short to spend it fighting battles that don't need to be fought. The snow kept falling, the seasons kept changing, and I kept showing up to work. Some days were harder than others, some winters more brutal, but I knew my role and I knew my responsibilities. That clarity, that understanding of what I was supposed to do and what I wasn't, made all the difference. In the end, that's what the whole situation with Deborah had really been about. Not snow removal or property lines or HOA politics, but about knowing where your responsibilities end and someone else's begin. About not taking on burdens that aren't yours to carry, and not letting someone else's anger and unreasonableness become your problem. I'd left Deborah's street unplowed for an entire season, not out of spite or revenge, but because it wasn't my job to plow it. That simple truth, that basic fact of responsibility and proper procedure, had been the resolution all along. Everything else, all the drama and conflict and eventual changes, had just been the natural consequences of returning to how things were supposed to work. Years have passed now, and I'm still with the Public Works Department, still overseeing winter operations, still making sure the streets stay clear and people stay safe. The Riverside Estates HOA is still one of our best clients, professional and appreciative and properly funded. The private roads stay maintained, the residents are happy, and the whole system works the way it was designed to work. Sometimes new employees ask me about the story they've heard, about the HOA president who tried to block my plow route and what happened. I tell them the truth, all of it, because it's a valuable lesson. I tell them about Deborah's demands, about the cones and the boulders and the threats. I tell them about discovering the road classifications and making the decision to follow actual policy rather than years of informal practice. And I always end the same way. Your job is to follow proper procedures and do the work you're actually responsible for. Not more, not less. When someone tries to make you do something outside your authority or contrary to regulations, you document it and push it up the chain. You stay professional, you stay calm, and you let the system work. Because in the end, the system exists for a reason, and following it protects everyone, including the people who are angry at you for following it. They usually nod, taking it in, storing it away for when they eventually face their own Deborah, because in public service, you always eventually do. There's always someone who thinks rules don't apply to them, who believes their personal preferences override policy, who mistakes their own importance for actual authority. But there are also always more people like Marcus Williams and Jerry Martinez, people who understand community responsibility, who step up when leadership fails, who do the hard work of making their neighborhoods better. Those are the people who make jobs like mine worthwhile, who remind me why I chose public service in the first place. The snow still falls every winter in Lakewood, Minnesota. The trucks still roll out in the dark early morning hours, their plows scraping and pushing, clearing paths through the cold and ice. And I'm still part of it, still proud of the work, still grateful for the lessons learned, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. Because that winter when I left Deborah's street unplowed, when I refused to be bullied into doing something improper, when I stood firm on the boundaries of my actual responsibilities, I learned who I was as a professional and as a person. I learned that doing the right thing isn't always easy or popular, but it's always worth it in the end. And every time I drive past that corner lot on Willow Creek Drive, where decorative boulders once blocked my path and orange cones tried to dictate my route, I remember. I remember the frustration and the stress, but also the resolution and the vindication. I remember that one person's unreasonableness doesn't have to derail an entire system if you trust the system and follow it faithfully. The street is clear now, properly maintained by mutual agreement and professional respect. The house looks happy, lived in by people who care about their neighbors rather than controlling them. The neighborhood has moved on, stronger and wiser for the experience. And I've moved on too, carrying the lessons forward, teaching them to others, applying them to new challenges as they arise. Because that's how experience works. You go through something difficult, you learn from it, you grow, and you use that growth to handle the next difficult thing a little better. Deborah tried to block my plow route, and in doing so, she set off a chain of events that transformed her neighborhood, cost her money and reputation, and ultimately drove her away from the home she'd been so determined to protect from a few piles of snow. It didn't have to go that way. If she'd been willing to listen, to understand actual regulations, to work collaboratively rather than demanding compliance, none of it would have happened. But she wasn't, so it did, and in the end, everyone learned something valuable. Sometimes the hard lessons are the ones we need most, even when we're convinced we already know everything. Especially then, The plow routes remain the same, adjusted and properly documented, but the same. The private roads are clearly marked and contractually serviced. The HOAs know their responsibilities, and the town knows its. And somewhere in a condo in Edna, Deborah presumably lives her life, hopefully having learned something from the experience, though I'll never know for sure. What I do know is that I did my job right, stood firm when it mattered, and came out the other side a better professional for it. That winter when Willow Creek Drive stayed buried under snow, when one woman's ego met the immovable reality of proper municipal governance, it wasn't about revenge or petty satisfaction. It was about doing the right thing, even when the right thing is hard, even when someone's screaming that you're wrong, even when it would be easier to just give in and do what they want. Because in public service, in any work that matters, there are rules and procedures and responsibilities for a reason. Following them isn't being inflexible or unreasonable. It's being professional. It's being responsible. It's doing the job right. And that's exactly what I did.